Hello, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Off Script. I'm Tina Velez, manager of the Enterprise Solutions Architecture team here at Expel, joined by my wonderful host, John Hanzinski. And today we have a very special guest, and it is Peter Silberman, our Chief Technology Officer here at Expel. And we've asked him to join us to talk to us a little bit about his origin story, everything that got him to the chair he's in today, some of the people that helped him along the way, and hopefully some lessons that he can impart upon our audience because he is a very wise man. So with that, we're going to get into this conversation, start asking Pete some questions, and hopefully there's some good tidbits in it that everybody can benefit from. John, anything you want to add before we get going?
No, Pete, thanks so much for joining us. I know our audience is going to be super interested in your background. You've done so many different things. I'm really excited for our audience to learn about you, your background, your role in the organization, and really how you think about problems. So thank you so much for joining us.
Excited to be here, guys.
Yeah. So Pete, what we want to do is when Tina and I kick off these episodes, one of the first things we like to ask our audience or our guests is specifically is like, you know, the role you're in, how you got there, and specifically like who helped you along the way. And then possibly if you can weave in like any like really pivotal breakthrough moments that you had, you know, our audience would be super interested in learning more about you and kind of those key breakthroughs. So Pete, can we tell us a little bit about yourself?
There's so many forks in the road where you look back and be like, well, if I made just that different decision, I don't know what life would be like. But the path I took to get here, I wouldn't say I understood that it was intentional, but the path I took to get here started a bit ago now, which makes me both feel old and know that I'm old. So it's kind of awkward when that reality kind of hits you square in the face. I got into the notion of security. I wouldn't even call it cybersecurity because I don't think there was an industry. The date I put on cybersecurity being born is in the I think it was 2003, 2004 when LSD, the hacker group released a set of vulnerabilities that were pre-auth remote codecs. And then I remember Microsoft kind of shut down engineering shop for a while, a couple of days to retrain on secure development practices. And that was kind of a watershed moment. Because I think that was really when cybersecurity became this thing that was starting to get talked about in the news. But my journey in cybersecurity started before that. See the old comment as we go through this and we talk about like yellow pages and such. And I saw a True Life on MTV, actually, like a hacker's True Life, and it just fascinated me. The stuff that folks were talking about, their understanding, just the way they understood something. I wanted to understand it as well as they did. And that catalyzed it. I was already on a journey, but it kind of catalyzed. I wanted to understand the offensive side specifically. And so it just consumed everything I could. And I remember reading FRAC articles and just thinking, holy cow, there are people out there that understand like assembly in a way that I want to, and that understand exploit development in a way I want to. And it's the seminal papers that written by Dark Spirit and Alpha One, where you're like, holy, like, how do they understand it? How do they teach themselves? And I became fascinated with like teaching myself because there were no options. There wasn't like friends I could go to. There weren't books there were no, cybersecurity sections in Barnes and Nobles, or if you want to go far enough back to Borders books. So I just became fascinated and I just did everything I could to teach myself and started, buying computers to put stuff on, to just try stuff out. And I decided that I wanted to get a job in what now is known as cybersecurity. At the time, it was just computers. I wanted a job in computers, and I decided that I didn't want to work at a summer camp anymore. That's what it came down to. And I called or emailed everyone in the Yellow Pages, and I got 0 calls back. But I managed to burn about a half a summer in applying for jobs because my parents saw it. And so then they came to me and said, "Hey, you didn't get a job. You got to go to work." And by that point, no one would pay for me to come to work. And so I was not only going back to summer camp, I was going back to summer camp as a volunteer, which is like insult, injury, salt, wound. But every night I would check Bug Track, which was a mailing list that people would publish advisories on. And I'd go to the about section of anyone who published a advisory that had a website that had a company, like it wasn't Hotmail or anything. I'd go to the website. So I sent a company called iDefense posted a thing, and they said, "Hey, here's a vulnerability," and they had actually announced this vulnerability contributor program, which was kind of the first of its kind to buy bugs. And I emailed them because they were based nearby, or I thought they were based nearby. It turns out it wasn't as close as I thought. And I said, "I'll work for free." And I got a response. And then I remember the response because it was one of the people who my first mentor, Pedro Mamini. It's like, "That's actually illegal. But we'll have you up for an interview. And if you pass, we'll pay you," I think it was $7 an hour to come do vulnerability dev and review and stuff. So I went and I got the job, and I worked there for half a summer. And that was my first foray into it. And I continued to work at iDefense as an hourly worker during the school year. And then sometimes I'd just do it that instead of school because, I wasn't as big a fan of school as I should have been. And so that was my first journey. And there I met someone by the name of Jamie Butler, who was at a company called HB Gary that's somewhat well known at this point. And at the time, they were building a reverse engineering platform, and I was again really interested in offensive and offensive side of things, and specifically reverse engineering. Went to work for him. We did some offensive development as well on the rootkit side in those times, and released it under our name. So did some cool stuff there, and then I was told that college was the thing you do, so I kind of was like, all right, we'll give it a whirl. I actually, in that time, I ended up presenting at Black Hat. I forget the first time I got the Black acceptance email when I was in high school. I remember what class I was in when I got it, and that was pretty cool and also somewhat frightening. And so got to speak and go to Black Hat at I think 2003 ish.
Wait, is this the video I saw? Is this the one that you wanted us not?
Hopefully you didn't find the video evidence, but there is one video I'm aware of me speaking. Yes, I don't know that the bits and bytes work that far back anymore. Thankfully, it's very blurry. But I got to speak with a friend of mine, Richard Johnson, and that all went really well. And did the work during the summer at various companies with Jamie and so on. And then I got a phone call as I was graduating. It was like, hey, why don't you come work for me? And I said, well, what's a Mandiant? And then he explained to the company. I was like, well, what's an incident? Well, he explained that. And I was like, okay, I think I'm supposed to look for a job. I don't think you're supposed to get a phone call and be like, hey, do you want a job? And I was like, so I decided to think on it. And I had this moment where I was like, they say I'm a young adult, but I'm not sure that's true. I probably should just take the job and not go out trying to find one. And so I did. I called him back and I took the gig, and I'm grateful for that moment. Jamie, as well as a mentor of mine. I've been lucky along the way to have many mentors. I'm gonna miss folks who I should call out that I would thank along the way, and because there's a couple at iDefense. So went to work at Mandiant, and we did at the time it was 2008, and we were building an endpoint, and it was there to kind of scale incident response, and we were dealing with a lot of stuff that wasn't in the news, and that was the start of the journey onto the defensive side. I got really fascinated by the problems, the scale of problems, how to detect what was the stuff that I had previously been hired to do. I got the opportunity to co-found the Mandiant Labs group, present on research, join the malware analysis team. So we're getting paid to do reverse engineering, which is kind of crazy, and do it on behalf of customers that were in a bad spot and really feel like you're helping. It was very mission driven. It was a lot of fun. Through the FireEye acquired Mandiant, it's out there. And that journey was interesting. You go from a mission driven company to a little larger company, and kind of watching the transformation that occurs taught me a lot about leadership and culture. And then from there, I got to, one of the things I'm pretty proud of is being part of co-founding the data science group at FireEye, and seeing that group excel many years after I've left has taught me a lot about what you kind of leave, how you leave things, and what you put in place to grow and scale and maintain certain cultures and pockets. I think it's pretty cool, and I'm sure they've done amazing. I've seen some of the output, and I'm sure on the inside they're doing amazing stuff to maintain the culture we set out with. And then came to Expel, where I was not the CTO. I joined as a director, and was building a lot as an IC at the time, because you start in startup mode. It's about survival. John was right in there with us, and it's not about titles or reports or anything like that. It's about getting to the next phase, whatever that is. And I look back fondly, very fondly, on those very hectic moments. The good, the bad, the ugly, all now hold a special place in my heart. And over time grew and got the opportunity to become CTO as our CTO transitioned to become Chief Product Officer. And that was a very gracious transition. And from there led R&D, and now lead data science and engineering here at Expel. I think that's my journey. I'm sure there's stuff I forget on the way, and maybe I focus too much on the start versus the specifics to where we are today and mentors, but I figured we can go back, I guess.
Not at all. I think that's a great tale, especially with the switch from offensive to defensive, as well as the road from doing just straight up research before this was even really a thing and getting to where you are now. I was really curious when you made that switch from red team to blue. Like, what was the biggest kind of shift in your own mind around how you were approaching the problems that you were working on?
I don't think there was a shift, and I think that's one of the advantages I have is like to understand when you understand how to break something. It's a way to see the world that you don't have to execute on, but it informs how you might prioritize risk, how you might prioritize what you build on the defensive side. And so I don't ever recall a shift. The biggest shift was kind of where I put my energy from a research perspective, but the mindset shift is, I don't know that it's really ever taken. I always look at things like, well, what would be the way you go about making this a problem, or creating leverage out of this thing that's non-linear, which is, I think, the biggest thing that like an offensive mindset teaches you, especially if you've had to do like any kind of real development in hostile environments, is like, you got to move constraints around and think about things differently. The environment you're presented with is not the environment you have to live in if you have control over it and can execute, and kind of thinking creatively about how to move constraints around. That's no different than like, budget planning. Like, you've got constraints and you want to move them around. You got to think creatively about how to do that. And so I think some of that mindset never left me.
It sounds like you were cold calling a whole bunch of companies when you were in high school. Now, what did those cold calls sound like?
I'm sure they were. I don't know if we can curse, but I wanted to say effing terrible, and like, I don't blame them for not coming back, because like, who hires a 16-year-old who's cold calling you, and you're like, because these were computer repair things in the yellow page. This wasn't security. I didn't know what I was doing. I think back to like what I could develop then, and like what I thought I could do, and like there was such a chasm. Thankfully, no one hired me, I think, and thankfully Pedram picked up the phone, because I think I was most qualified for the job I got.
I'm super curious. Were you given guidance to say, hey, or to go call these folks? Or, I'm not even joking, or was it, no, listen, I'm going to brute force my way, and one way I know is I've got this physical copy of the internet we used to call the yellow pages. I'm going to do a dictionary brute force attack until I get hired. Like, I'm curious, like, were you already thinking that way? And basically, for the audiences, Pete, the way you think about solving problems, has that, obviously it's matured and evolved, but it sounded as though, I don't want to put words in your mouth, like, even growing up, the way you approach solving problems, like, we're going to just try some stuff and kind of figure it out, or like, talk to me about the thought to, I'm just going to call people until somebody picks up. Like, that's not something a typical teenager would think to do. At least I didn't. I'm curious in terms of your reactions to that, like how you think about that, how you thought about that.
Right. There was no one doing what we were doing or what I was trying to do. And there was no words to talk about. It wasn't in the news. New York Times wasn't talking about cybersecurity. These phrases we take for granted. We forget how young our industry really is.
Yeah.
And so there was no one, it never occurred to me to ask, how do I go about doing this? I think one of the things that I've always, like, you look at how you go about doing things as a kid, and I think there's a lot to that. And for me, I had a unique a set of challenges in school, specifically a dyslexic in the 90s, which is treated very differently than it is today. And there was no path that allowed me to copy. I didn't have that luxury. And so it never occurred to me to not open up the yellow pages. Just like, I have to accomplish a thing. And so like, these are how I connect neurons. And like, I'm sure if I talk to folks about it, they'd be like, there's probably a better way. Like, or, hey, we know people who have a computer repair office. Or maybe if you go to the store and you show them that you're not trying to scam them, they might let you work for free, especially if that's the pitch. Well, I'll work for free. Like, and I don't know if that was the pitch every single time. I'll be honest. I probably didn't offer to work for free completely, because I know I also wanted to like buy a new computer, and my parents were clear, like, that needs to come out of like what you earn. And so it was like, the compact desktops. I remember I was trying to get a compact, with the COMPAQ, those ones I wanted. And so I don't know. I think it wasn't, we forget how little was understood, that like, I don't think there was an option. And so I just was like, all right, this is the path. And I'm grateful it didn't work out. And I'm great. Like I said, like, the journey through here is so many, like, if Pedram hadn't responded to that email, I would have not got iDefense. I wouldn't have met Jamie. I would, like, each step, Michael Sutton, Dave Endler, these are all people who I met throughout this early years. All of them have gone on to be successful executives, actually, which is kind of crazy.
I want to tap on that a little bit, Pete, if that's okay, because when you look off your mentors, immediately recognize some of the names. I'm sure our audience may recognize some of those names. What was it about your mentors where, they were able to have such a huge impact on you in your development? But also when you think about what they've gone on to do, like if you're kind of summarize, the reason we ask this is because a big part of what Tina and I are trying to accomplish is, listen, let's globalize the distribution of what works, what doesn't, so on and so forth. And one of the things that we're hearing from a lot of our guests is, mentors had a big impact on their careers. And then the ability to be a mentor is a really important thing. So like, what was it about all of those folks that made them great mentors? And then it would be curious, Pete, is like, when you think about yourself operating as a mentor, like, how do you think about mentorship? It's a really big part of what we're trying to, share with our audience here.
Well, let me answer the first one first, because it might give me the words to describe, because I just think, geez, I'm lucky and I want to pay it forward. So like when I think about, what's important about a mentor is like, I want to give as much as I can, because I just know that question, like how I got here, it's a bunch of people giving me their time. Like I don't have any special anything. I don't think, like, I've got some stuff I'm good at over the years, but like at the time you wouldn't have seen it. And I don't think anyone could. And I think the graciousness and to put that kind of karma out there for all of those folks who've been along the way, even folks who I've, failed to mention, or who, just a one conversation in a parking lot or at dinner once to get to pick their brain. And so I always try to think about that, like what people will remember for the conversation I'm having with them, and how that can be useful. And I always think about paying it back. It sticks. It's very important to me, because there's nothing about what I've done, I don't think, that doesn't require people to have helped along the way. And I just think mentorship's so important. So yeah, I try to do that wherever possible, both in Expel and outside of Expel. People ask, and I think one of the biggest things is asking, right? To this day, during the pandemic, I would send, John knows this, we talked about this some, I'd send a message every week or every other week, just trying to connect with other leaders, right? Because I don't know what they're going through. I don't know how what I'm going through is any different. But if you feel so isolated, and I don't mean just the pandemic, but leadership or being even an IC solving a hard problem can feel very isolating. And one of the fastest ways to get over something is to learn how not to do something from other people's experiences. And that's one of the things I think mentorship can give you is, hey, like, here's a way to think about this. And also just an ear where they know you're someone who's gone through it is useful, or you're someone who can empathize in a way that I don't feel alone. And so I think like asking is such the like minimal thing. And I think you see it on LinkedIn, people talking about like, well, if people ask, I'm here. And I think that's really true. I think, in the worst cases, they don't respond. But no one was like, hey, F you, I don't want to help you, and you're silly for asking. And because the hit rate on my messages was, 2% maybe. Like, it wasn't high. I wasn't like bringing in like, virtual coffees hand over fist, but I was trying. And I think that's the biggest thing, is reaching out, even to this day, reaching out and finding people that are solving interesting problems, or building interesting companies, or building interesting teams, and wanting to compare experiences, especially outside of cybersecurity. I think in cybersecurity, we sometimes get tunnel vision on like it's cybersecurity, but there's so many analogous industries that are going through similar things, that reaching out and seeing how they're solving it might give you a whole broader perspective on how to be successful with whatever you have. And the other question you asked, John, was like, what made them give me the time, or how they?
Yeah. Before we jump onto that, though, it sounds as though is that still something you even do in your current role? You reach out to your network. It sounds as though, old Pete is current Pete in terms of wanting to go out there and reach out and connect with people. The other thing I heard, Pete, is you don't have a fear of failure. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but 2% hit rate, there's a couple things there. It's having the willingness to admit, like, I could use some help here and some perspective, and the courage to go out and ask, and probably not reacting and go, oh my gosh, only 2% reacted. Like, talk to me about your mental model. It sounds as though, not everybody's going to get back to you, but hey, if 2% comes back, that's better than 0%, right? Am I
Yeah.
right way? Yeah. What, like, have you always been like that? Because, introvert here checking in, sometimes the fear of failure can kind of like make someone not do a thing. Doesn't sound like that's something you've ever dealt with.
No, I would say, I definitely don't fear failure like that. That's true. That isn't, but I'd say that's acquired. That's not how I was born. Everyone goes through life experiences, and you can if you're lucky, fail and grow from the failure and then kind of embrace it. The flip side is, and it's not a fault, failure sucks. It sucks. There's nothing fun about it. Like, but if you don't let it define you, there's so much opportunity. And I think looking back, I was lucky in that I did fail in places I didn't want to fail.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a choice in looking at that. I just didn't. It wasn't an option to be like, yeah, that piece of paper you got back on a test, that's just, that F's actually just an upside down. That they're missing a line, and that's actually a B if you turn the paper. Like, that wasn't, those weren't options, right? It was like, no, you didn't do super great, and you tried pretty hard, and that really sucks, and that's a pretty terrible feeling. And I don't know what the clicking was. It wasn't like I looked it back at those moments and like, I knew that I could embrace failure, because I didn't at the time. But I do think getting exposed and still persevering, I guess, build some of that. But I believe it's a really acquirable skill. I don't believe it's like a trait that you're born with. I think it's just, the willingness to be uncomfortable. And I think we all have a certain level of tolerance. And I always talk about like adding 2 to 5% of that, like find your authentic voice, and then take 2 to, anywhere from, I like to say up to 15% uncomfortability, but whatever your growth pattern is. And that's how you grow. And it's true in biology with hypertrophy and how you build muscle. It's true in a lot of our lives. We don't realize it. And I think just embracing that is key. I don't think, again, there's anything special about me and failure. I was forced to look at it, I think, at a earlier in life.
Yeah.
It's easier if you think of that F on a test, like as a kid, it's an F for fantastic or fabulous is the way I approached it. Right?
I don't know if I was there either, but I
this myself.
Yeah. I went through it in college. Like I bombed out of some pretty important classes. And they'd say like, well, goodness, you're gonna have a W on your transcript for withdrawal. And I'm like, I have a W because it tells me that I have some common sense that says I'm not going to pass this class and get me the F out. That's called common sense. I wish it, started with a W, would be way cool. But I never bought into that. I was like, I'm trying really hard. It's not going to work.
Kind of a common theme in everything that you've said so far. It's very much just a willingness to kind of take chances, keep pushing yourself, and keep growing and iterating. That's something that John and I have discussed as well. And even with some of our other guests, it seems like folks who have been in this field for a while have kind of like flexed their muscles in different ways, learn new things, continue kind of growing up in the industry as the industry becomes a thing. You have to be very comfortable with change, and you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable pretty much all the time, because you're working in a lot of greenfield spaces. Is there anything that has helped you kind of make that kind of mental adjustment more easily, like that willingness to be uncomfortable in very dynamic settings?
I think a lot of like the other way I'd answer the question about like is how did I get comfortable with failure, or like, iterating to like get to an outcome. I mean, when you're learning like reverse engineering, there's nothing other than banging your head against the wall. Like, you're like, what does this do? How do I get code execution here? And like, as you're learning, you don't know all the tricks, especially when you don't know people. And so it's constant failure. It's a constant failure, because the minute you get success, you've achieved a pretty like big objective. Like personally, that's that like dopamine hit, that adrenaline rush when you get it. It's kind of like addictive, which I think was a piece of it, especially early on for me, was that like, wow, there's something really special that like you get when you figure this thing out that no one else knows about. Like in a vulnerability setting, you discover something very few people know about, and like that was, for whatever reason, like very exciting to me. This might be a factor, and I obviously. Clearly, I haven't done a ton of introspection. That's a very insightful question, Tina. So I'm iterating live here. I think it's kind of the comfortability, and like, I've had to learn these things. What's one more thing, right? Like as change is sometimes scary, because you have to go learn new skills, or you have to embrace a new way of doing it, it can be learning. And I think when you've gone through enough things to know that you have a way to learn and teach yourself, it becomes exciting. It's a new challenge versus a new threat.
We were going to talk a little bit about, like, you talked about your experiences with mentors, and getting access to their time and getting access to how they think about things is really important in terms of. But if you could provide some guidance in terms of what makes a good mentor, or how you even think about those things, I'm sure the audience would love to learn a little bit more about that from your perspective.
I think it's gonna be an unsatisfying answer because like some of it's gonna be it depends, right?
Sure.
Like, but I think in the case you knowing why you want to mentor is really important, right? So understanding and like let me be 100% clear. When I talk about some of the people who've impacted my life, I had no idea I needed a mentor. They were just gracious enough to be like, this chucklehead over here could use some advice, and I'm going to provide it periodically in a way that's useful. But as we think about like, people, LinkedIn and all these aspects of being able to reach out and look for a mentor, being intentional about why. What's the thing you're looking for? Because that gives a sense of connectivity, right? It's like, oh, you're looking for this thing. I have this experience. It makes sense versus like, I'd like a mentor and we're just having coffee and talking about what. So demonstrating some intentionality, possibly outlining, hey, I'd love to talk about this topic, like not just what you're looking for, but what you want to cover, especially if it's someone who doesn't have a lot of time. So that they know, like, look, I can help because it's I know why you're looking for it. I know what topic you want. That sometimes are connected, sometimes not, and why you think that this person's a fit, right? There's actually there's someone, I forget who it is, but there's someone who walks through what a good, like how to ask for a good mentor, and that's some of the stuff I remember they said, and it resonates. It kind of it helps with the, like, especially if it's someone who might be busy. Like I'm engaging other people who are very busy, likely. And I want to be clear on like, hey, I loved seeing how you accomplished this. I think you'd be a good fit for these reasons. This is what I'd love to discuss if you have 30 minutes, type deal. And I think that pattern works. And then I think within your company, there's also opportunities for mentorship that's a little more informal, like, pairing up with someone who's gotten to that next phase and you want just more regular advice. And I have regular check-ins with other CTOs that outside of cybersecurity just to hear what they're working on. And it's been an amazing source of energy. It's been an amazing outlet to just understand what others are going through in various phases of company and leadership positions. And it's always useful to not feel potentially alone.
I think it's really good perspective, Pete. It's, as not being afraid to reach out and ask for help, but also as a potential mentor, not being afraid to look out and spot where there's potential opportunities for you to help. But also the thing that you said that resonated is even the ability to say, I'm going to reach out to folks in my social network or circle that carry the same title, not just in this industry, but different industries, to kind of think about how they think about problems is really interesting and compelling. It's funny as it all ties back to that yellow pages and your ability to say, I'm going to go forth and seek help and input and seek help and input. I will. That's super, super cool. Tina, do we want to shift focus here and talk about, if we could go back in time? Do we want to ready to go there yet? Or do you have any follow-up questions?
We could, but I got another question for Pete, which is, you've talked a lot about the importance of mentorship as a thing where you consider it paying it forward. When you say that, does that mean to you that you're looking to kind of help other people reap the benefits of the mistakes past you made?
I think it depends on the situation and what folks are asking for, right? I think in the like very tactical, hey, I have this problem, I'd love mentorship on how to go about like tackling this thing, how to have this conversation, or this, I have this problem or I'd like to accomplish this outcome. There's a lot of, hey, here's some lessons learned. I always try to caveat it with, these are my lessons learned. And you have to be authentic to yourself and how you communicate and how you approach problems. Because I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned, and I know we're going to talk about things I go tell my younger self, but it comes up here, is if you're copying and mimicking someone else and it's a hard thing to do, like cognitively hard, it's not going to come through as well as finding your voice, your authentic way of doing the thing, whether it's an IC work or talking about the thing or whatever the activity is, being really embracing your authentic way of doing it with some inputs. And that's what I try to like offer as inputs. I always tell folks that I'm talking to, like, you have to find your voice, your way of doing it. Here's some things to think about. So I don't think I lean on the, hey, let me save you some time. There are very specific areas where I can tell a story of like a thing. It's usually more on the technical side, and I can save somebody some time. But even that, if it's a good learning experience, it's better for them to learn it. They'll remember it better. And so, yeah, I think I hedge more on the, like, let me provide some inputs. But if someone asks me direct, like, what shouldn't do, I'd be like, here's how I think about it. But I don't lean on that. I think that's where you end up in trouble.
fascinating. So it's a perfect transition to the next part of this, which is asking you if you went back in time and you found that Pete poring over the yellow pages, calling up computer companies, just thinking about the overall trajectory of your career and where you are now, what are 3 lessons or 3 pieces of advice that you would give yourself?
Well, you heard one of them, which is, I think it's really important to learn from others that are excellent at whatever you want to do and continue to do that. But to be excellent, you got to make it your own. There's very few exceptions. And if they are, they're pretty tactical and you probably go read them in a book like, hey, here's how to do it. But in general, you got to contextualize it within your operating environment with your strengths, with all those stuff, but getting those inputs so you can build on that and kind of get a jump start is really important. So I think, I'd go back and talk to myself about being authentic to myself in how I talk, what I'm excited about and the person I am. Not that I was ever inauthentic, but sometimes you see someone who's great at having a hard conversation as a manager. You're just like, I want to copy that exactly. And that doesn't work. It's just a great way, for me, it didn't work. And I think that you finding your voice to where you can internalize it and you have your mental model for how you want to have that conversation means you're not fumbling around looking for stuff in the conversation, or if you're trying to solve a hard problem, how others solved it may not be the best way for you to solve it, but understanding it and taking pieces of it and building it into your own working model is really fundamentally key. So it's kind of like copying is the best form of flattery, but then there's the got to be authentic into how you want to use that once you kind of get into your head. I think I'd also go back and tell myself that I think it's easy to not lean into your superpowers if you're someone who wants to learn a lot. And I think everyone would do better if they knew they had to improve in certain areas, but leaned into their superpowers as well, versus tried to spread themselves thin or not focus on their superpowers, but focus on their weaknesses and building those up. I think it's really important to know where those weaknesses are and continually to work on them. But the ROI, I think you get there in the time you spend, depending on what the weakness is not commensurate with enhancing your superpowers and then kind of offsetting that with a team that buoys some of the weaknesses. And I think that's hard to see as an IC. It's hard to see when you're young because you can only see the weaknesses. You're comparing yourself to others oftentimes, and that might not be healthy, but we're all humans. And so if I could go back, I try to convince myself of that. I'm not sure I could. I'll be honest with you. I could see my younger self flicking my older self off. So I'm not sure that one would have landed, but I do think it's important for others to hear who might be more open to hearing that at whatever phase of work or life they're in. The third one is kind of, I think there's something about who you are now is not who you have to be or who you'll become. And I like this notion of, education starts the day you leave school and never stops. I don't know who I stole that quote from because I'm sure I didn't come up with it. I have it in a note to myself somewhere that I pulled, but so we'll credit somebody who came up with that. But you're going to evolve if you're always learning. And so it's okay. And it's okay to have these weaknesses now because they may not be there. And it's okay to enhance your superpowers because they may take you far and you don't know what kind of team you're going to have or what team you can build around you that offset them. And so embracing who you are now and knowing it's not who you'll be as you evolve, just like we are as, who we are in our 20s isn't necessarily who we are in our 30s and so on. They're pieces, but we evolve. And it's hard to see that, I think, when you're really work driven, which is what I was, especially very focused on work and working hard. And I don't regret any of that, but I would go back and kind of try to lessen the obsession of the next thing. And because you asked for 4 and not 3, I made that up. I need to ask for 3, but the last one is, and this is one it's been interesting to look back on. The questions you ask really expose the mindset you're in. And so as much as you can be curious and in learner mode with the questions you ask, stay there. It's just healthier. It's healthier for everyone, especially as an IC. A lot of ICs can move to judger mode where they're asking questions and this questions reveal a mindset of judgment. And it's not intentional. They're not judging you, but they've already entered a lack of curiosity. And just the questions and the way you think about questions that you're engaging with others has such a power on your mindset and being curious and being a learner and is going to enable others around you to flourish. And then there's times that especially as you have experience and expertise, you're like, hey, this is the wrong call. And there's judgment that can be passed, but being in that curiosity and learner mode for as long as possible is so key. to enabling others. And it's something that I think I wish I had discovered earlier.
It's great stuff, Pete. We'll call this the lightning round. Normally around this point in the episode, we ask where our listeners can get in touch with you. But when I think about the folks that are working in the SOC that may be watching this, or the folks that are currently in school saying, "Hey, I'm trying to break into be a reverse engineer." You did that at the highest level for many years. I have to ask the question. Say someone's listening to this show right now, and they're thinking, "Well, how do I even break into reverse engineering?" What's the guidance or advice you'd give them? Imagine you have the ability to kind of be a quick mentor to all those folks trying to break in. What does that sound like, Pete?
I think it's one step at a time. Everything is a skill. You don't look at a doctor and say, "I want to be a surgeon," without thinking, "Well, I have to go to school." And that may not be, depending on the skill or trait you want to evolve, that may be an option. But saying, "Hey, I want to go," break it down. It's one step at a time. I want to go be a reverse engineer. Well, okay, let's start with x86 and examples and iterate there. I wanted to be a developer. Let's start with online classes or reading source code and contributing to an open source project. Take it one step at a time. Don't set it so big. Take it one step at a time and set accomplishable goals. Everyone started opening up an empty file, not knowing how to write the language they're good at. Everyone. No one was born knowing that. Everyone opened up IDA for the first time and was like, "Oh my goodness," right? No one was born knowing that. And so one step at a time, I think where people and know that you're going to have setbacks and you're going to have successes. And it's just about consistency, one step at a time. That's, I think, how you do a lot of things. But I think a lot of the time we look at how far people are and we compare ourselves starting to where they are. And we lose sight of the 20 years they have, whatever the things are that they did, the work they put in to get there. We lose sight of that. And yeah.
Pete, thank you so much. If the audience wants to connect with you on social media, where can they find you?
I wasn't prepared for this. No, I kid. I have a Twitter that I'm not super active, but I always think that someday I'll become active. It's just Peter Silberman at Twitter, and the same as LinkedIn, Peter Silberman. More active on LinkedIn than Twitter, but trying to be a social media mogul like John, I'm not as good at putting together the words.
Well, if you need a mentor on that,
we and I both know I've asked for your mentorship. So let's be honest and put it out there. I've sent John things that I want to post, and he's graciously helped me that in my emoji game. So
yeah,
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
fun facts.
He's paying it forward. I'm so glad. This brain trust. This is what everyone's going to get out of this conversation. John is fantastic at emoji and threaded conversations on Twitter, which he is. And Pete is, I don't know. Pete is over here iterating day at a time, taking those same lessons in terms of just making sure you're not the same person you were 5 minutes ago and constantly changing. I really appreciate your time and hope our audience got some good tidbits out of this, especially around the importance of connecting with other people from a mentorship perspective, whether it's specific to this field or pretty much anything else. Just learn from each other, stay curious, and just never stop learning.
Yeah.
John, is there anything you want to kind of wrap us up on?
No, you nailed it. Pete, thanks so much. Tina.
Thank you guys.
That's it.